बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम।
शुरू अल्लाह के नाम से जो रहमान और रहीम है।
इक़रा बिस्मि रब्बिकल्लज़ी खलक़।
पढ़ो ए नबी अपने रब के नाम के साथ जिसने पैदा किया।
खलक़ल इंसान मिन अलक़।
जमे हुए खून के एक लोथड़े से इंसान की तख्लीक की।
इक़रा व रब्बुकल अकरम।
पढ़ो और तुम्हारा रब बड़ा करीम है।
अल्लज़ी अल्लम बिल क़लम।
जिसने कलम के जरिए से इल्म सिखाया।
अल्लमल इंसान मा लम यअलम।
इंसान को वो इल्म दिया जिसे वो न जानता था।
Assalamu alaikum students. We start our class in the name of Allah who is most merciful, most beneficent. This is class 10 and the period is English. Today is the 5th video lesson of first semester final term. And today's topic is, as you can see, active and passive voice. This is just a review class because you have already studied this topic before. So we are going to review this topic in this short video. Before we start and see the details of active and passive voice, let me tell you how do we decide that if a sentence has active or passive voice. So basically, voice is the quality or a characteristic of a verb. So we say that in this sentence the verb is an active voice or the verb has active voice, or in another sentence we say the verb has passive voice or is in passive voice. So how do we decide that in a particular sentence has active or passive voice? So for that you need to look at the subject of the sentence, because it all depends on the subject. So if you do not know what is the subject, you can review first what the subject of a verb is or what is a subject in a sentence. So I suppose that you already know and you have studied what is the subject in a clause or in a sentence. So you can see I have written two sentences on the board. The first one, they play football in the evening. This is just a very simple sentence with one verb, play, and they as a subject. Football, the word that comes after the verb normally, and if it is a noun, it is object of a sentence. So here is the verb and here is the subject. Okay. In the second sentence, we know, same like above, we have football as a subject. Here we do not have only one verb, rather we have a verb phrase. We have a combination of two verbs. One is helping verb and the other is a main verb, right? So we have is played as a verb, right? We do not have object of the verb, rather we have a preposition by, and then we have the object of preposition, right, them. Okay, and then we may add an extension, in the evening can come here. Now which of these two sentences is active and which of these is passive, and why is that so? So we know, you all will agree, that the first sentence is active, or we call it, it has active voice, and the second one has passive voice. Right. Now if you look at the first sentence, the subject they performs the action or is performing the action of the verb. So they play football in the evening. Okay, so the subject is active, it is performing an action. So we conclude that if the subject of a verb in a sentence is performing an action, is doing an action, right, so that sentence or that verb has active voice. Okay, if you look at the second sentence, subject is football. So football is not doing any action, rather something is happening to football. So the action which is in the verb, is done on the subject. So the subject is passive. The subject receives an action rather than doing it. So that's why we call it, it has a passive voice, right? So we conclude as a definition, if the subject performs an action in a sentence, it's doing something, it has active voice. And if the subject does not perform an action, rather it receives an action, something is happening to the subject, it is said to have a passive voice. All right? Now, another fundamental question, why do we need to express certain things in passive? Normally, most of the time we use active. So why can't we just keep on using active voices in our language, in our writing or in our speech? So why sometimes it becomes important, right, or mandatory to use passive? So the first reason is for the sake of variety. We all know that variety is a characteristic of a language. A good piece of writing is considered the one which has variety of sentence structures. A good piece of writing or a good piece of speech should not have monotony, because monotony, same kind of structure, using same kind of structure, it sometimes bores the reader. The reader feels boredom, or it doesn't sound good to the readers or to the listeners. So whenever you write in any piece of writing, sometimes for the sake of variety, the same thing you can say in active, but you would prefer to say the same thing in passive voice for the sake of variety of sentence structure. Another important reason why we use passive, because sometimes the doer is not as important as the action itself. Action is more important than doer. So the doer of the action, the performer of the action, is not as important. We don't want to highlight that, or either we don't want to mention it, right? Or sometimes it's not known even. Okay, we don't know. That probably is the third reason, that the doer of the action is not known. Not known. So in that case also we use passive structure rather than active. So here let me give you an example when action is more important. For example, instead of saying I invited my friends, we say my friends were invited. Now who invited them? It's not as important as my friends. Okay. For example, you say I have been asked to answer the question. Right? I have been asked to answer the question. Instead of saying, somebody asked me to answer the question. Now that's not important who asked me. Right? So I am receiving the action. Right? So, so that I want to highlight in a sentence. So I would say, I have been asked in passive rather than saying that so and so person asked me to answer the question. Okay. In the same way, doer of the action is not known. Now instead of saying somebody stole my watch, we don't know who stole it, so we simply say my watch has been stolen, or my watch was stolen yesterday. All right. In the same way, sometimes an action is done by people in general, so we don't want to say people use internet for the research. Rather, we would say the same thing in passive. We say internet is used for research. Here, the action is more important than who is doing it. All right? So this is equally important to understand that when do we use passive rather than, just like it is important to learn how to use passive. So we need to learn both how to use a passive sentence structure, what is the passive structure, okay, and we also need to learn and understand that when should we use passive structure in our speech or in our writing, especially in writings. So normally students are asked to choose, in your board examinations, the students will be asked to choose the correct passive of an active sentence, or vice versa, or the correct active of a passive sentence, right? So you need to know the technique of how to change an active sentence into a passive sentence, as well as you need to learn how to construct a passive structure or passive sentence at its own, without keeping in mind the active sentence. You should know that how we write a passive sentence, by itself, independently. So let us see what steps do we take when we change an active sentence into a passive sentence. So before that, you need to keep in mind, a kind of table for the conversion of active verb into passive verb, because once this is the major part where students probably go wrong, and they make mistakes. So if you have that table in your mind, that how the active verb changes into passive verb, the other part is relatively easier to understand, right? So I'm going to draw a small table and will explain it to you, and that's going to help you to understand the conversion from active into passive. So let's see, we'll just write an example verb. Example verb, let's see, we take it as take. We'll write take as an example verb. So we know that in the forms of verb, take is the base form of the verb. The present tense form of the verb is takes, or take itself. All right. Past tense of take is took. All right. And past participle, which is more relevant in passive voice, is taken. So, you need to be careful that the verb form we use in passive is be plus past participle. Okay, for your easiness, we call it third form of the verb. All right. So that's not the past tense form. That is not the second form of the verb we use. Okay. Although, all the regular verbs have the same past tense and the same past participle form of the verb. For example, work is worked and worked ed. Right? We add ed to make past participle and past tense form both. So, but in passive, we do not use past tense form, we do not use second form, we use past participle or third form of the verb. All right. So now what a passive verb is, you'll see that all passive sentences, all, without a single exception, all passive sentence must have this structure: any form of the verb be and past participle or third form of the verb. Now, be, some students may find it a bit confusing that, for example, when you say football is played all over the world, so there is no be verb here. So, for those students who do not understand or are confused, be actually is the base form of the verb. All right. It has present tense form. All right. Present tense form of the verb is, am, or are. This is the present tense form of the verb be. Past tense, we have was or were. This is the past tense form. Then we have past participle form or third form of the verb, that is been, right? And then we have ing form of the verb, that is being. Okay. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are 5 forms of the verb, just like any other regular verb. Okay. That's why we call it auxiliary verb, because it can work as a helping verb and as a main verb also. Okay. So these are the forms of verb. Be, okay, ismr for present, was verb for past, been for past participle, and being as a present participle, or we call it ing form of the verb. Okay. Now what I mean to say is, in passive structure you will always find any form of the verb be plus the third form as a main verb. So there will always be a verb phrase with helping verb be. It may have some other helping verbs as well according to the tense. So we'll see for different tenses it may have even 1 or 2 more, all right, helping verbs, but be will always be there. Okay, any form of the verb be will be there, and the past participle form of the main verb will be used. So let us draw a table. So here we have active verb and here we have passive verb. All right. So for present, for example, in active voice, we will use this example verb take or takes. All right. Take or takes. Right. This is in active. So for passive voice, we'll use is, am, are, taken. All right. Is, am, are, taken will be the passive form of this verb in present simple. Now in past simple, we know in active we simply use past tense form, that is took, or the second form of the verb. Now here in passive we'll use was or were with past participle will remain constant, taken. Right? Now in present continuous, for example, we know in present continuous we use is, am, are with ing form of the verb, which is taking. So you say ismr with taking, right? Now the passive will be verb will remain same, is, am, are. Now in passive we know that in continuous we use ing form of the main verb. So here we will not use ing form of the main verb, rather we will use the ing form of the verb be. So we will say ismr being taken. All right. Past continuous, was, were, taking. Okay. Was, were, taking is past continuous, active voice. Okay. In the same way, in passive we'll use was, were, being. Being taken. Remember, in past continuous passive voice, we use was or were, being, and then past participle or third form of the verb. Okay. Now coming to perfect. So we'll see present perfect, has or have, and for past perfect, let's do it together, had. We know with all these helping verbs, has, have or had, in active voice we use participle taken. Okay. Has taken, have taken, had taken. Now in passive we use has, have, had, been taken. So main verb will remain same, past participle, but before that we'll add be verb here with has and have. Now present perfect continuous or past perfect continuous tense, these two tenses normally we avoid using in passive. We do not use normally, in present and past perfect continuous, we do not use these tenses in passive. So what about modal verbs? We know that all modal verbs, they take base form of the verb. Okay, so we use take. So now modal verbs include, will, for example, shall, can, could, etc. Right? May, might, have to, has to, had to, right? Had better. These are all modal verbs. All right? Now, with modal verbs, we simply use the base form of the verb in active. All right? For example, will take, shall take, can take, could take, may take, might take, have to take, has to take, must take, etc. Had better take, right? Ought to take, should take, etc. Now, in passive, we simply add be before, the main verb. We use modal verbs with be plus, again, past participle form, that is, taken in our case here in example, right? So for example, will be taken, can be taken, must be taken, can be taken, could be taken, etc. Have to be taken, has to be taken, ought to be taken, etc. So if you just understand and learn this table, I hope changing from active into passive, it's going to be very easy for you, right? So you understand, keep in mind that in what tense we use which helping verb either is, am, are, was, were, being or been, or simply be. So let's see, let's take an example of an active sentence, right? A simple sentence, for example, we study English. We study English every day. Okay, so we know that we is the subject here, study is the verb, and English is object. All right. Now when we change from active into passive, the first step is to identify the object in a sentence. In active sentence, we need to identify the object, which normally comes after the verb. So you need to identify or point out the verb and see whatever noun or a pronoun comes after the verb, that is an object. Okay. Now take that object and make it the subject of passive voice, right? So here in this case we'll see English. Okay, so we'll start with the object of active sentence. That becomes, it's not no more an object, it becomes the subject of the passive sentence. Okay, now place the verb, but when you place the verb you need to change the verb from active into passive verb according to the table which I provided you before, just now before this. So we know that study is present tense. Okay, so if the verb is in present simple, the passive verb will change into is or am or are plus third form of the verb. So how will we decide that we need to choose is or am or are? That will be based on the subject. If the subject is singular, we'll use is. If it is plural, we'll use are. And if it is I pronoun, we'll use am. So English we know is a singular noun, so we'll use is. Now we need to use the principal verb or main verb, and as we decided earlier that we need to use the past participle form of the main verb. So the past participle or third form of the verb study is studied. So English is studied. So we place by and then we place this we here, but remember when it becomes an object of the preposition by, it changes into objective form. We as a pronoun is the subjective form, so as an objective form it changes into us, and then this will remain same. It's an adverb every day. All right, so that's the simple 3 steps. Identify the verb and see what is the object in active sentence. Take that object, place it on the subject place in passive voice, change the verb into passive by adding be plus past participle or third form of the verb. Then if you want to mention the doer of the action, sometimes we simply skip it. We don't mention. I'll give you some examples where we do not need to use who performed the action. But if you want to mention the performer, make it in a phrase, a prepositional phrase, where the doer of the action becomes the object of the preposition by. All right, and then other extension, whatever it is, you can use. All right, so now here let us see, if we take the example of another tense, make it past simple. So if you make it past simple, you say we studied English, not every day, let's see, yesterday, because every day will not suit with this past simple. So let us see, we studied English yesterday. Okay, now the tense has changed. Okay, here we have past simple now. So if there is past simple, we know the passive will change. Instead of is or am or are, we'll use either was or were with past participle. So English is singular, so we'll pick up singular, was. English was studied by us yesterday. Okay. So two tenses done. Now let's see continuous. So what will be the continuous form of this sentence? What will be the continuous? Yeah. The continuous will be we are studying. We are studying English now. The adverb will also change. We cannot use every day or we cannot use yesterday. So we are studying English now. All right? So, how will we change into passive? The passive verb, you say, English again is singular, so we'll use this is present, we'll use is. And for continuous, if you remember, in continuous passive, we use is-am-are plus being plus past participle form of the verb. So you say English is being studied by us now. All right? Okay. And in the same way, if you change it into past continuous, if you change are into were, so you will also change here English was. The rest will remain the same. We were studying English at 4 o'clock yesterday. Okay, according to this, we'll change. We don't use it now. Can't. So, same we'll change here. English was being studied by us at 4 o'clock yesterday. Right? So, this was present continuous and past continuous. Now, what about perfect? Right? Let's change English as a. All right? Okay. So, in perfect structures, we use has or have or had. So, for present, for example, we'll use we is plural, we'll use we have studied. We have studied this topic. The adverb will be before. We have studied this topic before, right? So the object is this topic, which will become here the subject. We say this topic. All right. Now topic is singular, so we'll use has. And if you remember the table, for perfect we use been. So you say this topic has been studied by us before. Okay? If you change it into past perfect, so you'll just remove have and put had. We had studied this topic before we came to this class. right? So the same way you will change had, has into had also here. Had and had. This topic had been studied by us before we came to this class, right? Well, so perfect, that is also done. Present perfect, past perfect. Now finally, let us put some modal verbs and do this example. All right. Let us see. Put the we must study this topic again. Right. Must is a modal verb. We must study this topic again. So as we decided with modal verbs, we simply put the modal verb plus be plus past participle form of the verb. So here we'll see this topic must be, say this topic must be studied again. We don't need to put by us here, right? This topic must be studied again. If you change must into can or will, for example, we will study this topic again. This topic will be studied again. Can be studied again. Have to be studied again. Any modal verb, the structure will remain the same, and you will, you will stick to the structure. Modal verb plus be plus past participle form of the verb, right? So this is how we change active sentences into passive. If you just use these three steps and keep that table in your mind, you'll be able to change it into passive easily. Now let us practice some sentences from passive into active. How we change from passive into active, because this is also going to be one of the questions in your exam. Now let us see. You say this book was written by my favorite writer or author. This is a passive sentence, we know, because this book is the subject which does not perform an action, rather something is happening to it. Was written, be plus past participle form of the verb. That also shows that this is a passive form. By my favorite author. Right? So the first thing to identify while changing from passive into active is who performed the action. Right? So normally that you will find as an object of the preposition by. Right? You will find after by. So we know this whole phrase is the performer or doer of the action. So that we'll pick up from there and make it the subject of active sentence. So we'll start my favorite author. Now we'll change the verb just like before we change from active into passive. Now we'll reverse it from passive into active. So we know we need to understand that what is the tense of this sentence. So how are you going to see it? You'll see the helping verb. Either being is used, been in used, has is used, has been is used, is being is used, whatever. So here we have only was. So we know that this is just simply in past simple, right? So for past simple, we simply change in active, we use past tense form, which is the second form of the verb. So we'll simply write wrote. My favorite author wrote. Now the object, what did he write? We'll pick it from the subject of the passive sentence, right? This book. Right? This is how we will change it. My favorite author wrote this book. Okay. Now sometimes in passive it is possible that the doer is not mentioned. Example, we say this building was built in 2005. Let's see. This building was built in 2005. This book was written in 1998. You know, such sentences you may find. Now here we do not have the phrase by, you know, so and so. So we don't know actually who has built this road or this building, who has written this book, example. So what will we do in that case? Because for active sentence we must know who performed that action. So in that case we normally write some general subject. For example, we know it from the context that who might have, you know, done it, or simply we use they as a subject. All right. So in this case, for example, we'll say they, you know, and then was built again is in past simple. We'll use past simple tense or past. They built this building in 2005, right? Same way, my mobile phone has been stolen, right? This is passive, has been stolen, but we don't know from the sentence that who stole it. So in that case, we can use somebody, you know, indefinite pronoun, somebody as a doer of the action. So we might say somebody has stolen my mobile phone, right? So this you need to keep in your mind. If the doer of the action is not mentioned in the passive, and still you have to change it into, you know, into active. So use indefinite pronoun or they or somebody, right? Or people sometime, you know, as a subject. Now finally, let us see some other form of the sentences. These were all assertive or, you know, simple statements. Now if the statement is imperative, for example, if the sentence is imperative, order or command, how will we change it? So simply, for example, we say open your book. Okay, this is active because we know that you is there. We don't write it, but it's there as a subject. You open your book. Okay, it is active. So if you want to change it into passive, so we normally use let in the beginning. Okay, and then we place the object. Okay, Open is a verb. So whatever comes after the object, after the verb is object, so make it as a subject place. Let your book. Okay, and then we simply place be plus third form of the verb, opened. Let your book be opened. Okay, all right. So this is how we change imperative sentences. So I hope you have understood how you need to practice it. In your book, in every chapter, some active and passive exercises are given. So keep this lecture in your mind and solve all those exercises. And we'll meet again, inshallah, next week with some other topic. Thank you and goodbye.